When I called to ask my daughter when the wedding was, she didn't even hesitate. Her voice was flat, cold, and disturbingly casual. "We already got married, Mom. We only invited people who really matter. Just send the beach house keys and stop being so dramatic." I remember gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles went white, forcing myself to breathe to not let my voice shake. I just smiled into the emptiness of my kitchen, said a soft, "Of course, sweetheart," and hung up. 3 days later, I left a wedding gift at their door, one wrapped in silver paper with a white satin bow, the kind of elegant wrapping that made it look like love, when in truth it was heavy with reckoning. When her husband opened it, his screams carried down the hallway like an alarm bell. But you see, that story didn't begin with that phone call. It started much earlier, 2 years ago, the night my daughter Madison first brought Trevor home. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what I did. My name is Carol. I'm 65 years old, and until a few days ago I thought I knew my only child. Madison was the axis of my world. I raised her alone after her father abandoned us when she was just 8. I worked double shifts as a nurse, patched together birthdays on a shoestring, and spent summers in our small Cape Cod beach house where we built sandcastles and laughed at the ocean spray. She used to call me every single day, even into her 20s, lunchtime chats about nothing and everything. Gossip about coworkers, the plot twists of whatever Netflix series she was binging. Silly little things that stitched us together. She was my daughter, but also my friend. That was before Trevor. The night she brought him home, Madison was glowing in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. I had cooked her favorite, my lasagna, the recipe she begged for every year on her birthday. He arrived in a tailored suit that looked too expensive for a casual dinner, carrying roses that were almost too perfect, like they'd been chosen by a florist who knew the effect they were meant to create. "Mom, he's different," Madison whispered to me in the kitchen before he came in. "He really gets me." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this man could love her as fiercely as I did. Trevor was handsome, polished in the way that should have been charming but felt rehearsed. He asked thoughtful questions about my nursing career, leaned in like every story mattered, helped clear the table, even insisted on doing dishes. He looked at Madison not as though she was his partner, but as though she were his prize. And 3 separate times during that single dinner, he found ways to bring up my beach house. That house! It wasn't just wood and glass and sand. It was our sanctuary, the place where Madison learned to swim, where she whispered secrets into the salty air, where we ate ice cream with our toes buried in the dunes. My heart tightened each time Trevor mentioned it. The next morning I confided in my sister. "He's very interested in our traditions," I told Janet. She chuckled, saying that was sweet, that it meant he wanted to be part of the family. But I couldn't shake the unease in my gut. Trevor's charm reminded me too much of Robert, my ex-husband. Robert, who had that same shine of false sincerity, that same magnetic smile that eventually revealed itself as nothing more than a mask. Over the months that followed, I watched Trevor insert himself into Madison's life with alarming precision. He had opinions on her friends, her job, even on how often she should speak to me. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the daily calls became weekly, then monthly, and then barely at all. "Trevor thinks I should focus more on our relationship," she explained when I asked. "He says successful couples prioritize each other." That should have been my first blaring red flag, but I told myself I was being overprotective. Madison was 28, successful in her career, strong-willed and independent, everything I had raised her to be. If she was happy, who was I to interfere? But happiness is fragile when it's built on lies. I wasn't invited to her engagement party. I learned about it with the rest of the world through Facebook. A glossy photo of her left hand with a massive diamond flashing under restaurant lights, captioned, "He asked." I said yes. "Can't wait to start our forever together." 53 likes. Comments pouring in from strangers congratulating her. And not a single mention of me, her mother, because of course everyone assumed I already knew. I stared at that picture until my coffee grew cold, my stomach twisting with betrayal. She had called his parents before she called me. I forced my voice steady when I rang her. "Congratulations, sweetheart. Tell me everything." She gushed for 20 minutes. How romantic the proposal had been. How his parents had cried tears of joy. How they were already planning the engagement party at their country club. "When's the engagement party?" I asked, careful, hopeful. A pause. Then another. "It's really just for Trevor's family and some of our couple friends. His mother is traditional." She's planning everything. I could barely keep my voice neutral. And what do you think? I think Trevor knows his family better than I do. I want to start off on the right foot. That was 6 months ago. 6 months of watching the man I distrusted rewrite my daughter's life. I wasn't invited to venue tours. I wasn't consulted about flowers or dresses. When she posted photos on Instagram, it was always Trevor's mother smiling by her side. I was becoming invisible, a ghost in my own daughter's story. And then 2 weeks ago came the phone call that cleaved my world in two. Madison said, "Mom, I need you to be cool about this." Trevor thought she depended on me too much. Trevor thought she leaned on me emotionally in unhealthy ways. Trevor thought it was time for boundaries. Boundaries that meant fewer calls, fewer holidays together, maybe no Christmas at all. Christmas, the one tradition we had protected fiercely ever since Robert left. Madison and I had always spent it in pajamas, sipping hot chocolate, tearing open presents by noon. Trevor wanted that gone. And then came the beach house. Madison said almost casually, "I've always assumed I'd inherit it someday." But Trevor pointed out it puts pressure on our relationship. He doesn't feel comfortable there, it's complicated. I nearly dropped the phone. That house was our history, our heartbeat, and Trevor wanted it erased. I ended that call with a hollow promise to think about it. But in truth, I was already planning. Not revenge, not yet, but clarity. I needed to know who Trevor really was. It didn't take long. A week of internet searches, a few quiet phone calls to Madison's college friends, and the puzzle came together. Madison wasn't Trevor's first target. There had been Emma, her family owned a restaurant chain. Before her, Sarah, she had a trust fund. Both women had been isolated from their families. Both relationships had ended in scandal when Trevor's debts and lies surfaced. Trevor Morrison wasn't just controlling, he was a predator. And my daughter was his latest prey. That's when my thoughts turned darker. That's when the shape of my wedding gift began to take form. The final push came 3 days ago. Madison called voice flat and rehearsed. "Mom, Trevor and I got married yesterday. A small ceremony, intimate, only the people who really matter." My body went cold. Yesterday I thought the wedding was in October. We decided to keep it simple. She listed off who was there. Trevor's parents, his sister, his best friend. No mention of me. And then the real reason for the call slipped out like venom. "Mom, Trevor and I were wondering if you could send us the keys to the beach house. We want to use it for our honeymoon." There it was. The truth beneath the sugarcoating. My daughter hadn't called to share joy. She'd called to claim property she and her husband believed already belonged to them. I held the phone tight, my voice measured. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make sure you get the keys." When I hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time staring at the roses I had planted with my own hands. And I knew with absolute clarity Trevor thought he had won. He thought he had cut me out, but he had underestimated me. I was not going to lose my daughter to this man. So I planned my gift. And when I left it at their door, I knew that once it was opened, Trevor's carefully constructed lies would come crashing down around him. The gift I left at their door wasn't chosen on impulse. Every piece inside that silver-wrapped package had been curated with intention, assembled like instruments in a symphony of truth. I had spent 3 days combing through old files, reaching out to lawyers and digging into newspaper archives that had nearly gathered dust with time. It was not revenge, not yet. It was exposure. It was a mirror held up to the man who thought he could erase me. I remember that Friday morning vividly. The air smelled of sea salt, the kind of damp breeze that seeps through your hair and settles on your skin. I stood in front of their apartment door, holding that portfolio wrapped so beautifully it could have passed for any other wedding gift. A note rested on top, my handwriting steady and elegant. "Congratulations on your marriage. Every new husband should know his wife's family history. With love, Carol." Then I walked away, each step echoing in the quiet hallway, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination. I didn't have to wait long. At 2:17 p.m., my phone rang. Madison's number flashed across the screen, but when I answered, it wasn't her voice. It was Trevor. "What the hell is wrong with you, you crazy old witch?" He screamed, his voice cracking raw with something that sounded more like fear than anger. "How dare you send us this garbage?" I set my teacup gently on the saucer, deliberately calm. "Hello, Trevor," I said evenly. I take it you opened your wedding gift. This isn't funny. This is harassment. I'm calling the police. I smiled faintly. I'm confused, dear. What exactly would you report that your mother-in-law gave you a wedding gift containing public records and newspaper articles? In the background, I could hear Madison crying. Her voice reached out faintly through the phone. Trevor, calm down. Let me talk to her. But Trevor snapped. No, this woman is insane. She's trying to ruin our marriage before it even starts. The corners of my lips curved not in joy, but in grim satisfaction. Trevor, I said softly, surely you're not upset about me sharing some family history. I thought you'd appreciate knowing the connections between us. Because the truth, you see, was heavier than any wedding gift they could have expected. In my research, I had uncovered something chilling. Trevor's grandfather, William Morrison, had once been business partners with my late husband, Robert. Together, they had invested in a real estate development in 1987, a shopping center project that was supposed to change their lives. Instead, it destroyed them. William Morrison had embezzled funds, siphoning money until Robert was ruined. $2 million stolen, lawsuits, bankruptcy, the loss of Robert's reputation, his first marriage, and eventually, the collapse of the man himself. Robert never recovered. And though I raised Madison after he left us, the shadow of his destruction lingered in every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, every tear shed behind closed doors. Trevor had never told Madison this story. He hadn't told her that his polished charm, his tailored suits, his business ventures were all built on blood money, stolen funds hidden away in offshore accounts. Funds that by legal right belonged to Robert's estate. And since Robert had died 3 years ago, that meant every penny belonged to Madison. And Trevor knew it. He had known for years. He'd been quietly accessing those accounts, living off stolen money while weaving his trap around my daughter. When I told him this over the phone, his rage cracked into panic. "You're lying," he hissed. But the fury in his voice wavered, unsteady. "I never lie," I replied, calm as stone. "I'm a retired nurse. Precision is second nature to me. But don't take my word for it. Your grandfather's lawyer in Miami remembers you well. Mr. Rodriguez has been very helpful." I could hear Madison's voice again in the background, higher this time, urgent. "What's happening? What money? Oh, and Trevor," I added, my tone almost sweet. "The beach house keys are in the portfolio too. Consider it part of the gift. Perhaps you'll find it relaxing to discuss your family's financial history while looking at the ocean view." And then I hung up. The silence in my house that followed was profound. I sat in my garden again, staring at my roses, hands folded calmly in my lap, and for the first time in years I felt something close to peace. Trevor thought he had built walls so high I couldn't reach my daughter. But lies are never stronger than truth, and I had placed the truth directly into his hands. Hours later, Madison called. Her voice was shredded from crying, trembling so much I almost didn't recognize it. "Mom, what did you do?" "I gave you both a wedding gift, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady. "Did you read it?" "I read enough," she whispered. "Trevor says it's all lies, that you're trying to break us up." "And what do you think?" I asked softly. There was silence, the kind that presses heavy against your chest. I think I need you to explain some things." So I did. I told her about her father's business deal, about Morrison's theft, about the way Robert's life had unraveled after that betrayal. I told her about the investigators' records, the offshore accounts, the evidence that Trevor had been accessing money that never belonged to him. On the other end, I heard her sharp intake of breath. "That's impossible. Trevor has a consulting business. He specializes in investments." I couldn't help the sadness in my voice. "Madison, when was the last time you saw him actually work? The last time you saw him with a client, a real meeting, a real contract?" The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing, hear Trevor in the background yelling at her to hang up. "The law firm wants to meet with you," I told her gently. "As your father's heir, you're entitled to that money. They estimate it's worth nearly $4 million now." Her whisper was barely audible. "$4 million." "Yes," I said. "And Trevor married you 3 days after I hired the private investigator. Don't you think the timing is convenient?" Behind her, Trevor's voice rose again, accusing me of jealousy, of manipulation, of trying to destroy their marriage. But I pressed on. "Madison, ask yourself this. If none of it were true, why would he be so afraid? Why wouldn't he want to clear his grandfather's name? Why wouldn't he want justice for your father? I let the questions hang heavy and unyielding. Then I told her the final piece. That Trevor had done this before. That Emma and Sarah existed two women with the same story, the same wounds. That both had families who discovered Trevor's pattern just in time. Stop, Madison whispered, her voice breaking. Please stop. I have their contact information, I said quietly, if you ever want to hear it from them yourself. The line went dead. I set the phone down, my hands trembling faintly now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I stared into the darkness outside my window. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow my daughter will have to decide between the man who has isolated her and the truth that could save her. That night I slept soundly, for the first time in months. And when Sunday morning came, I found Madison on my porch steps, looking more broken than I had ever seen her. Still in the same clothes from Friday, her eyes red, her hair tangled, her whole body sagging under the weight of betrayal. She didn't even say hello. Tell me everything, she whispered. And I did. We sat at the old kitchen table where she used to do her homework, where we once planned her college applications, where I once placed birthday cakes with candles she blew out in single breaths. She spread documents across the wood, her hands shaking. She had searched Trevor's laptop after he stormed out. Emails, correspondence with someone named Marcus Webb, references to Morrison inheritance and offshore accounts. Proof that Trevor had been planning this long before he even met her. And then what shattered her last defenses, she called Emma and Sarah. She heard their voices, heard the echoes of her own story in their words. He finds strong women with family money, Madison said, her voice hardening as she pieced it together. He isolates them, gains access to their accounts, tries to own them. She looked at me, her eyes wet but blazing with something fierce. I was just another target. I reached across the table, squeezed her hand. You were his target, but you're still my daughter. She nodded, and for the first time in 2 years, she asked me for help. I'm going to destroy him, but I need you. In that moment, I felt something lift inside me, a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. My daughter wasn't lost. She was fighting her way back, and together we would fight. The plan we built wasn't complicated. In fact, its simplicity made it elegant, almost poetic. Predators like Trevor thrived in shadows, in secrets whispered in isolation. So the way to undo him was simple: drag him into the light. Madison was trembling when she first agreed. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, the way her heart still tugged toward him even after the truth had burned through her illusions. That's the thing about manipulation, it doesn't vanish overnight. It leaves hooks, little barbs of guilt and longing, and every time she said his name, I could hear the echo of those hooks pulling at her. Mom, she said, her voice cracking as she stared at the pile of documents on our kitchen table. What if I can't go through with this? What if I see him and I forget all of this? I reached across and took her hand the way I used to when she was a child, frightened by thunderstorms. Sweetheart, I said softly, that's exactly why Trevor chose you. Because you're kind. Because you love with your whole heart. But love isn't weakness. Love becomes weakness only when someone uses it against you. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but I saw something harden in her gaze. Then I'll make sure he never uses it again. On Monday morning, we called the law firm that had handled Robert's estate. Patricia Winters, the attorney, was a sharp woman in her early 50s with iron gray hair cut into a sleek bob. Her voice on the phone was calm but precise. Every word weighted like a stone. Madison explained the situation haltingly, and I filled in the details. Patricia listened, then said firmly, "You need to come in immediately, both of you." When we arrived at her office, a tall brick building with brass lettering on the door, I felt like I was walking into a battleground, though no blood would be shed here. Madison clutched the manila folder against her chest as though it were armor. Patricia greeted us with a handshake that was firm but kind, the kind of handshake that says, "You're safe now. I'll handle this." She spread the documents across her mahogany desk, reading with eyes that missed nothing. "This is even worse than I imagined," she murmured. "Not only does Madison have a claim to her father's lost assets, but Trevor has been knowingly accessing stolen funds. That constitutes conspiracy and money laundering." Madison's face went pale. Criminal charges? Patricia nodded. Yes. The statute of limitations on your father's losses has expired, but Trevor's recent activity keeps this very much alive. If you're willing to cooperate, we can bring in federal investigators. This man won't just lose your inheritance, he'll face prison. For the first time in days, I felt my lungs fill fully with air. It was justice. Not just for Madison, but for Robert, for me, for every woman Trevor had deceived. That afternoon, Patricia introduced us to Agent Jennifer Liu, a federal investigator with a calm authority that seemed to fill the room without effort. She was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with steady brown eyes and a voice that never wavered. We've been monitoring Trevor Morrison for some time, Agent Liu explained. There have been complaints from other families, Emma Chen's, Sarah Walsh's, but until now we lacked the concrete evidence to proceed. What you've uncovered gives us everything we need. Madison's fingers twisted in her lap. What exactly do you want me to do? Agent Liu leaned forward. Trevor will come back. Men like him always do. He'll apologize, spin a story, try to make you doubt yourself again. We want you to let him, play along, but this time you'll be wearing a wire. Madison recoiled slightly, her eyes wide. A wire? Yes, Agent Liu said gently. We'll monitor everything. He doesn't need to confess to all his crimes. Just to enough to knowing about the offshore accounts to marrying you for access. That alone strengthens the case beyond doubt. Madison swallowed hard. And if he doesn't, then we already have enough financial evidence to charge him. But a confession makes the case unbreakable. I wanted to shield her, to tell the agent no, that my daughter had suffered enough. But I looked at Madison's face, saw the storm of emotions flickering there. Fear, grief, rage, but also determination. And I realized she wanted this, needed it. So I placed my hand on hers and whispered, I'll be with you, every step. By Wednesday afternoon, the first message came. Trevor's text to Madison. Can we talk? I miss you. I'm ready to come home. My stomach clenched, but Madison only exhaled slowly. She showed me the phone screen, her jaw tight. What should I say? I thought carefully, then answered. Say what he wants to hear. Tell him you miss him too. That you're sorry for doubting him. Tell him I was jealous, trying to interfere. Her lips pressed together, trembling, but she typed the words with steady fingers. Seconds later, his reply came. I'll be home Friday. We can start fresh. The trap was set. The next 48 hours stretched endlessly, each minute dripping with tension. Madison stayed with me at the beach house, too afraid and too angry to return to her apartment before the operation. At night, I'd hear her crying in the guest room. Sometimes she'd come sit beside me on the porch, wrapped in a blanket like a child, her eyes red. How could I not see it, Mom? She whispered once, staring into the dark horizon where the waves broke in endless rhythm. How could I believe him over you? I pulled her close. Because he was skilled. Because you wanted to believe in love, and because you're human, sweetheart. Being deceived doesn't mean you're weak. It means you trusted and someone exploited that trust. She buried her face into my shoulder, her tears hot against my skin. Then I'll never trust again. I closed my eyes. No. Don't let him steal that from you too. Trust isn't the enemy. He is. When Friday finally came, the tension was a living thing. Agent Liu and her team wired Madison discreetly in her apartment, tiny microphones hidden in her blouse and purse. They placed cameras in the corners, agents stationed nearby, everything controlled and precise. I wasn't allowed in the apartment during the operation, so I sat in my own living room staring at my phone, waiting for updates like a soldier's mother waits for news from the battlefield. At 7:43 p.m., a text, he's here. At 8:15, brought flowers and wine, acting like nothing happened. At 8:52, he's asking about our honeymoon again, wants access to my savings. At 9:31, got him to admit he knew about the offshore accounts, FBI moving in now. My hands shook as I set the phone down. I poured myself a glass of wine, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my throat. Trevor Morrison's career as a predator was over. But as I sipped, I knew something else too. This wasn't just the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of my daughter's freedom, of her return to herself. And perhaps, if fate were kind, the beginning of our healing. The night Trevor was arrested, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, no, the fear had burned away weeks earlier, replaced with something sharper, but because I couldn't stop replaying every moment in my head. The text from Madison had been the final confirmation got him to admit he knew about the offshore accounts. FBI moving in now. I imagined the knock at the door, the sudden confusion in Trevor's eyes, the agent stepping forward with practiced precision. I imagined the way his charm would falter, how his words, so smooth, so convincing, would catch in his throat when confronted with evidence he couldn't explain away. When Madison finally called an hour later, her voice was trembling but steady. "They took him," she whispered. "They actually took him. He was in handcuffs, Mom. He just kept saying I'd ruined his life." Her words hung between us, heavy with irony. He'd ruined hers. The next morning, the local paper carried the story, "Local man arrested in multi-state financial fraud scheme." Trevor's mugshot stared back at me from the front page. Gone was the polished suit, the curated smile. In its place was a man stripped bare, angry, desperate, and very small. Madison came to my house that day with takeout Chinese food, her eyes shadowed but lighter somehow, as though a burden had been lifted. We sat at the kitchen table, cartons of lo mein steaming between us, and she said quietly, "Agent Liu called. He's been formally charged with conspiracy, money laundering, and fraud. His bail is $500,000. I nearly dropped my chopsticks. $500,000, she nodded. "They called him a flight risk. His accounts are frozen. His parents can't help him. He's stuck." For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just ate the sound of our chopsticks against the cartons, the only noise in the room. And then finally she asked the question I'd known was coming. "Mom, how long did you know?" I set my food down, folded my hands. Honesty mattered now more than ever. I suspected from the beginning, I admitted. But I didn't have proof until 3 months ago. That's when I hired the investigator. Her brow furrowed. 3 months ago, right after Trevor told me we needed boundaries. "Yes," I said softly. She looked away, her jaw tightening. "And you didn't tell me." I sighed. "Would you have believed me if I had?" Her silence was answer enough. Finally, she shook her head. "No. I would have thought you were jealous or trying to control me. He made me believe you were the problem." My chest ached. "You don't have to blame yourself, Madison. You were manipulated." Her eyes welled with tears. "But I was cruel to you, Mom. I said terrible things. I excluded you from my wedding. I reached across the table, took her hand in mine. "You were deceived. That isn't your fault. And you're here now. That's all that matters." She nodded, but her shoulders slumped with shame. "I don't know how to forgive myself." "You don't have to," I said. "Not all at once. Just start by forgiving the girl who wanted to believe in love." That afternoon, she pulled out more documents, emails she'd found in Trevor's desk exchanges with Marcus Webb. Discussions of inheritance and offshore accounts dated years before she'd ever met him. He hadn't stumbled into her life. He had planned it, researched her, chosen her like a predator chooses prey. I watched her hands tremble as she laid out the proof. "He even knew about the beach house before we met," she whispered. "He knew about Dad's financial history. He knew everything. The coffee shop accident wasn't an accident at all." Her eyes met mine, blazing now. "I'm going to destroy him. I'm going to make sure he never hurts another woman again." For the first time in months, I smiled with pride. That's my girl. And so the weeks that followed became a blur of preparations. Meetings with lawyers, phone calls with Agent Liu, coordinating with Emma and Sarah, who both agreed to testify. The trial began 6 weeks later. The courthouse was a gray stone building that seemed to loom over us as we approached. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and tension. I sat in the gallery every day, my heart clenched, watching my daughter transform from victim to warrior. She testified with a dignity that left the courtroom silent. She spoke of the isolation, the manipulation, the way Trevor had convinced her to doubt her own instincts and cut ties with her family. Her voice never wavered, though her hands trembled when she described the night he told her I was unhealthy for her marriage. Trevor's attorney tried to paint him as misguided, not malicious. A young man who made mistakes, who got in over his head, he argued, but his words collapsed under the weight of the evidence. Agent Liu presented financial records transfers, offshore accounts, correspondence that laid Trevor bare. And then came the witnesses, Emma in her navy suit, calm and professional, Sarah nervous but resolute, each telling the same story, each echoing Madison's experience. But the most devastating testimony came from Marcus Webb. He had been arrested too, and in exchange for leniency, he revealed everything. Mr. Morrison contacted me in 2018. Webb testified, his voice flat, almost bored. He asked for help accessing accounts his grandfather had established. He said he needed a long-term plan to legitimize the funds. That plan was to marry someone with a legal claim. The prosecutor pressed him. Did he identify a specific target? Yes, Webb said. Madison Thompson. He showed me articles about her father's financial losses, said she was perfect, successful, but emotionally vulnerable, close to her mother who owned valuable property. He said she'd be easy to isolate. I watched Madison's face as those words fell like stones into the courtroom. The pain was unbearable, but beneath it I saw something else: rage, pure, righteous rage. Trevor sat hunched at the defense table, his once practiced confidence gone. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked small, powerless. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The words echoed like church bells. Trevor was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Restitution of over $8 million. Every cent he'd stolen had to be repaid, though it would take him a lifetime to even attempt it. At the sentencing hearing, Madison stood and delivered her victim impact statement. Her voice rang clear across the room. Trevor Morrison didn't just steal money. He stole 2 years of my life. He stole my trust in my mother. He stole my faith and love. He convinced me that the people who truly cared about me were the enemy. But here's what he didn't understand: I am not weak. None of us are. We were deceived, yes. But when we discovered the truth, we fought back. Together. The gallery erupted in quiet sobs. Even I, who had promised myself I wouldn't cry, felt tears streaming down my cheeks. Trevor didn't look at her. He stared down at the table, his shoulders shaking, though whether with rage or shame I couldn't tell. When the judge's gavel fell, sealing his fate, I felt something deep inside me loosen. A knot I'd carried for months, maybe years, finally untangled. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed, cameras, flashing microphones thrust forward. But Madison, Emma, Sarah, and I stayed close, a circle of women who had survived. Agent Lou pressed her card into Madison's hand. You've helped us shut down a predator who might have hurt dozens more. You should be proud. And I was. Not just proud, grateful, relieved, fierce. As we walked to our cars, Madison turned to me with a small, tired smile. Mom, someday when I find someone who truly deserves me, will you help me plan a real wedding at the beach house? Her voice cracked, but her eyes shone with hope. I wrapped my arms around her. It would be my honor. The trial was over. Trevor was gone, stripped of his freedom, his wealth, and his illusions of power. But endings, I've learned, are never tidy. They leave behind echoes, pieces of broken glass that cut when you least expect it. Madison and I walked out of that courthouse hand in hand, but even as the sun broke through the gray clouds, I could feel the heaviness in her step. Justice had been served, yes, but healing, that was another journey altogether. For weeks after Madison stayed with me at the beach house, the very place Trevor had tried to claim as his own became the sanctuary where she found herself again. I'd find her sitting on the porch in the mornings, coffee cradled between her hands, staring at the horizon as though searching for answers in the waves. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she didn't. Some mornings she'd whisper, "I feel so stupid, Mom. How could I not see it?" Other mornings she'd say nothing at all, just let the silence stretch between us. I never rushed her. Healing can't be forced, it moves at its own pace like the tide. One night, weeks after the sentencing, she came into the living room where I was knitting, her face pale but resolute. Mom, I had a nightmare. He was here. He was in the house and he had the keys. He kept saying it was his, that you'd given it to him. I woke up shaking. I set my knitting aside and pulled her close. It was never his, not for 1 second. This house holds our memories, our love, our life. He can't touch that. She nodded against my shoulder, tears soaking my sweater. I want to believe that. And slowly she did. We began revisiting old traditions, baking lasagna on Sundays, watching our favorite movies in pajamas, even putting up Christmas decorations in September just because we felt like reclaiming what had been stolen. Each act was a stitch mending the fabric Trevor had tried to tear apart. But healing wasn't just about us. Madison wanted to give something back to the women who had stood with her, Emma and Sarah. She reached out to them, invited them to the beach house one chilly autumn weekend. I watched from the porch as the three of them walked along the sand, their heads bent together, their laughter rising above the crash of the waves. They weren't just survivors, they were sisters now bound by scars and strength. That night, over wine and candlelight, Madison said something that stayed with me. Trevor thought he broke us by isolating us. But what he really did was connect us. He gave us each other. There was a power in that truth. A power Trevor would never understand sitting in his cell replaying his schemes that had crumbled into dust. 6 months later, Madison received her portion of the recovered assets, nearly $4 million. The number staggered her. "I don't even know what to do with this," she admitted, staring at the check as though it were a weapon instead of a gift. "Use it to build the life he tried to steal from you," I said gently. Not with anger, but with intention. She thought about that for a long time. Eventually, she decided to invest part of it into a non-profit that supported women recovering from financial abuse and manipulation. "It feels right," she told me, "to turn his theft into something that helps others." I watched her bloom through that work. She spoke at events, shared her story publicly. At first her voice wavered when she described Trevor, but over time it grew steady, strong. I'd sit in the audience, my heart swelling as my daughter transformed her pain into power. And one day she looked at me across the table, her eyes calm and certain. "Mom, I want to get married again someday. Not soon, but when it happens it'll be here, at the beach house, barefoot in the sand, fairy lights strung between the dunes, just like I dreamed as a kid." My throat tightened, "and I'll be right here every step." For the first time, the future didn't feel frightening, it felt full. But if I'm honest, I still think about Trevor sometimes. Not with fear, not even with rage, with reflection. I think about the way predators operate, how they charm, isolate, and manipulate, until their victims don't even realize they're trapped. I think about how easily kindness can be weaponized, how love can be twisted into a chain, and I think about the women who never got the chance to fight back. That's why I'm telling this story. Not just for me, not just for Madison, but for anyone out there who has ever doubted their instincts, who has ever been told they're too dramatic or too dependent. For anyone who has silenced their own voice because someone convinced them love meant obedience. Love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't demand silence. Love doesn't erase the people who raised you, who stood by you, who know your soul better than anyone else. If someone tries to cut you off from those who love you, that isn't love. That's control. That's danger. And I want you to remember something: predators thrive in secrecy. They count on your shame, your silence. But the moment you speak, whether to a friend, a parent, or even to a stranger, you break their power. I nearly lost my daughter to one of those predators, but I didn't. And today, she's stronger than ever. We are stronger than ever. So, if you're watching this, if my story feels familiar, please don't ignore the voice inside you. Don't wait until it's too late. Tell someone. Shine a light into the shadows. Because truth once revealed can never be taken back. That was the gift I gave my daughter on her wedding day, the truth. And though it broke her heart, it also set her free. Some gifts really do keep on giving. So thank you for listening. If this story touched you, if it made you think of someone in your life who might need to hear it, please share it. Leave a comment with your own story because your voice matters. And don't forget to like and subscribe so more people can hear stories like this. Together, maybe we can remind the world that family, real family, is never about control. It's about love.